Her name was Elin Margrete Aas, born in Stavanger, a city built on oil but raised on conscience. Her father captained offshore rigs for decades. Her mother taught biology at the local gymnasium. Every dinner was a paradox. The smell of diesel in her father's clothes mixed with the soft voice of her mother describing coral bleaching and bird migrations. Elin learned young that truth could taste like salt and contradiction. By the age of 16, she had already decided to undo the family stain. She volunteered at youth climate councils, wrote fiery blog posts condemning oil greed, and founded a small movement called Nordlight, aiming to turn Norway's petroleum wealth into renewable investment. In interviews, she spoke with both precision and fire, the kind that made others believe reform wasn't just possible, but inevitable. In her 20s, Elin's speeches made headlines. She faced corporate lobbyists on live panels, called them merchants of extinction, and left to standing ovations. Yet offstage, she couldn't pay rent. Her nonprofit, Nordlight, ran on idealism and exhaustion. Volunteers quit, sponsors withdrew, and her inbox filled with polite rejections. The first crack appeared in silence, not temptation, but fatigue. She told herself, if I could just get one steady donor, we could survive long enough to make change. That's when the invitation came, an email from a neutral intermediary offering partnership. The sender claimed they represented an energy foundation willing to fund green transition dialogue. The foundation's name looked generic enough. The amount was enough to keep Nordlight alive for years. Her assistant warned her, Elin, that foundation belongs to one of the oil majors. She hesitated, then said softly, maybe it's time they start paying their debt. If their money funds our fight, isn't that justice? It was the first time she blurred her own moral line, not for greed, but for survival. And in that self-justification, the betrayal had already begun. A year later, the foundation logos appeared discreetly on Nordlight's banners. Her speeches turned more balanced. She began using words like cooperation, transition, and dialogue instead of accountability, reparation, or guilt. Old allies noticed the shift. Journalists whispered of compromise. When asked if she'd taken corporate funding, Elin smiled and said, we're building bridges, not burning them. But bridges in Norway's winter storms freeze before they collapse. She didn't know yet that her own would break, and she'd be the one left hanging between both shores. The first meeting took place in Oslo, inside a glass tower that smelled faintly of polished wood and ambition. Elin arrived with her old canvas bag, frayed straps, Nordlight patch faded by rain. Among men in black suits whose shoes shone like verdicts. They introduced themselves as consultants, transition liaisons, fluent in both environmental jargon and corporate subtext. One of them, Eric Lund, had the calm confidence of someone who'd already bought the future. He began softly, we admire your work, Miss Aas. The world needs idealists who understand realism. Realism. The word hit her like a bruise disguised as praise. He spoke about collaboration, transparency, bridging the gap between activism and industry. Then came the slide deck, the kind that turned guilt into graphs. With your partnership, he said, we can accelerate sustainability from the inside. And then the figure, 3 million kroner, not as a donation, but as strategic alignment funding. Elin's heart thudded once. That number meant offices, campaigns, a film series. It meant survival, but branded survival. When she hesitated, Eric leaned closer and murmured, "You'll have influence where it matters. Isn't that what you always wanted?" Her pride stirred. Not greed yet, but validation. After years of shouting outside the gate, someone had finally opened it. For weeks, she told herself stories. That taking their money was subversion, not surrender. That she'd make them see their own hypocrisy from within. That influence required proximity. At first, she refused the press releases, kept her distance. But the oil company's PR team was skilled. They began to call her our sustainability partner. They inserted her quotes, carefully rewritten, into their annual report. When the document went public, her words appeared beside the company logo, wrapped in sunlight and slogans. A journalist called to ask if she had approved the phrasing. Elin froze. "It's mostly accurate," she said. Mostly. A small word that would one day devour her. The money flowed like melted snow. Nordlight expanded. Workshops, conferences, new equipment, all stamped with the discreet insignia of partnership. For the first time, Elin felt respected. The very executives who once ignored her now requested meetings. They spoke her language, carbon neutrality, innovation ecosystems, and she felt the seduction of being listened to. She began attending private dinners, networking opportunities, wine, laughter, quiet deals disguised as small talk. One evening, an older executive toasted her. "To Elin, the conscience of the industry." The table laughed. She smiled, but something in her chest burned. Later, walking home through the snow, she whispered to herself, "If I wasn't here, someone worse would be." That line became her nightly prayer. Months turned into years. Her speeches grew smoother, less urgent. She stopped mentioning specific polluters. Too divisive, the advisors said. She began to use metaphors. Our shared planet. Collective responsibility. Her followers noticed. Some wrote open letters accusing her of betrayal. She ignored them, then blocked them, then mocked them in private. "They don't understand strategy," she'd tell her assistant. But deep down, she knew. The old Elin would have signed those letters herself. The oil executives adored her balance. She was their shield, their moral fig leaf, and they paid for it, generously. She was invited to Davos, photographed beside ministers. The same press that once called her radical now described her as a pragmatic visionary. Each headline fed her vanity. Each word a quiet dose of poison. The breaking point came at the Nordic Energy Summit, a global event streamed live to millions. She was to give a keynote titled Harmony, the Future of Sustainable Transition. The speech had been co-written by the company's PR team. It was full of soft absolutions. No blame, no urgency, just the language of polished neutrality. The night before, she sat in her hotel room, staring at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked immaculate. Tailored suit, perfect hair, no trace of the firebrand who once stood in rain shouting over megaphones. Her assistant knocked. "They want a copy of your remarks for review." Elin smiled, hollow. They already wrote them. The next morning, she walked to the podium under a halo of stage lights. Cameras blinked. Applause echoed. She began reading. Her voice trembled only once, at the line, "The era of conflict is over. We must embrace partnership, a line she hadn't written. For a split second, she wanted to stop, to speak the truth raw and dangerous, but pride held her tongue. If I burn it all now, she thought, everything I built dies with me. So she finished. Applause thundered. The oil executives smiled, and for the first time, Elin felt numb. That night she vomited in the hotel bathroom, not from guilt but from exhaustion, the kind that follows years of pretending to believe in your own excuses. Her phone buzzed with congratulations. Her sponsors promised renewed funding. Her inbox overflowed with invitations to collaborative dialogues. She opened one message, a photo attached. It was from an old Nordlight volunteer, a teenager who once idolized her. The caption read, "I watched your speech. When did we become them?" Elin stared at the image, her own smiling face on stage beside the company's logo. Behind her, the slogan glowed, "Energy for a sustainable tomorrow." She felt her throat tighten, a phantom choke. Days later, she returned home to her coastal apartment overlooking the fjord. The air smelled of salt and cold metal. Her father, retired now, called to congratulate her, proud that his daughter had found balance. She looked at his old rig helmet sitting on the shelf, rusted and quiet. Balance. The word echoed like a moral trick. That night, she walked to the shoreline, watching the faint glow of offshore platforms on the horizon. They blinked like artificial stars, the same ones that had financed her dream. "I changed them," she whispered. "Didn't I?" The wind didn't answer. Weeks later, an investigative report surfaced. Green Partnerships, How Oil Money Buys Silence. Her name appeared midway through, not as hero, but as proof. Emails, contracts, quotes, everything laid bare. Nordlight's office flooded with journalists. Volunteers resigned. Her board disbanded. She called Eric Lund. No answer. Then an automated email. This account no longer exists. For the first time, she realized she hadn't infiltrated the system. The system had absorbed her, digested her, then discarded her when full. The scandal didn't destroy her overnight. It eroded her, grain by grain, reputation by reputation. Nordlight's website went offline. The donors vanished. But the oil company, careful as ever, released a statement. "We regret that our partnership has been misinterpreted. We continue to believe in Miss Aas's commitment to progress." Misinterpreted. The word wrapped her guilt in silk. She told herself that it was just media hysteria, that the journalists twisted context, that maybe she had gone too far, but not wrong. She convinced herself the world punished nuance, and in that rationalization, the softest poison, she began her descent. She stopped giving public speeches. Instead, she became a consultant, advising corporations on sustainable messaging. They paid her more than Nordlight ever earned. Her name was still toxic among activists, but in boardrooms, she was currency. The first time she walked into an executive retreat in Zurich, she felt the quiet luxury of hypocrisy. Champagne, recycled paper cups, slogans about ethical prosperity. She told herself it was survival, not indulgence. Her clients loved her polished anger. Authentic but manageable. They quoted her in marketing decks, invited her to diversity panels, posed with her in white rooms smelling of pine and power. Every compliment dulled the ache a little more. Soon, her conscience became background noise, faint, like the hum of a generator under glass. Loneliness came disguised as company. At one of those Zurich retreats, she met a journalist named Lucas, charming, clever, politically cautious. He said he admired her courage to walk the gray line. She didn't tell him she had painted the line herself. They began an affair. Dinners turned to nights in expensive hotels where guilt and desire blurred. He told her she was misunderstood. She told him he was safe. When he left in the morning, she'd lie in bed watching the news, scrolling through headlines about melting glaciers, drought, war. She felt disconnected from all of it, like a ghost watching her own species drown. The irony, the woman who once screamed for the planet now whispered only for validation. A year after the scandal, she was invited to an exclusive gala, Leaders for Tomorrow. She told herself she would decline. Then curiosity won. The ballroom was lit like a cathedral of commerce. Music pulsed. Faces she once condemned greeted her with polished warmth. A CEO hugged her and said, "You've matured, Elin. The world needs pragmatists like you." She smiled. She even laughed. It felt almost good, like being seen after exile. Halfway through the night, a large screen displayed a highlight reel of global sustainability icons. Her image appeared, smiling beside oil executives. Her quote superimposed, "True change comes from dialogue, not division." The crowd applauded. Elin froze. The words glowed behind her, permanent, public, irreversible. Someone handed her a glass of champagne. She drank it too fast. Then another. By midnight, the applause had turned into laughter in her head. When she stumbled out into the cold night, snow melting on her skin, she whispered, "I made peace with the enemy, and I became them." Her Zurich apartment overlooked the lake, minimalist, soundproof, soulless. She filled it with plants, but most of them died. Sometimes she left the TV on just to hear a voice that wasn't her own. Her consulting clients kept coming. The more hollow she felt, the more polished her slogans became. Authentic sustainability, the courage of compromise, the ethics of progress. Each phrase was a lie she no longer needed to believe, only sell. At night, she'd sit by the window, watching her reflection against the city lights. For a moment, she could almost imagine she was still the girl in the rain, holding banners, shouting truth. Then her phone would buzz, another client, another campaign, and the fantasy would dissolve into glass. She began to drink more, not heavily, just enough to forget the edges, to make the silence soft. It happened one morning in a hotel bathroom. She'd been flown to Dubai for a corporate sustainability summit. 5-star suites, desert backdrops, rehearsed sincerity. As she washed her face, she caught her reflection, eyes swollen, smile mechanical. Behind her, the hotel window reflected the city skyline, towers of glass and smoke, glittering above a brown haze. For a second, she saw both worlds, the one she once fought for and the one she had joined. The mirror trembled in her vision. "When did I stop meaning what I say?" she asked aloud. No answer. Only the low hum of the air conditioner, consuming oxygen in a room that called itself eco-certified. She smashed the mirror with her fist. Tiny fragments fell like metallic snow. Her knuckles bled onto the white sink. The blood looked pure, almost clean, a color that didn't lie. She bandaged her hand, attended the summit anyway. The panel topic, personal responsibility in the age of transition. She smiled, spoke eloquently, quoted data, received applause. Only she knew that the gauze under her sleeve was still damp with red. That night, she couldn't sleep. She scrolled through social media, saw activists chaining themselves to drilling sites, kids skipping school for climate marches. Once she would have joined them. Now she only watched, detached, like an old ghost scrolling through her former life. A message popped up. They used to believe in you. No name, no sender, just those words. She deleted it, but her hand shook. Shame faded faster than she expected. Each new panel, each paycheck, each polite nod at airports, they became narcotics. Validation, not money, was the drug. She craved to be liked, not believed. Her conscience was now a distant echo, drowned under the soft rhythm of praise. When a friend from her activist days confronted her in a cafe, called her a corporate ghost, she smiled sadly and replied, "At least ghosts can haunt." She meant it as irony, but the friend left without answering, and for the first time, Elin realized the full weight of her transformation. She wasn't haunting them. She was haunting herself. The last straw came disguised as opportunity. A global PR firm offered her a long-term contract to be the face of their new Green Responsibility campaign. They promised full creative control, on paper. In practice, every draft was rewritten, every image softened. One evening, reviewing edits, she noticed something. They had replaced her phrase, "fight for truth," with "strive for balance." The substitution was subtle, precise, a small surgery on her integrity. She stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Then, she signed the contract anyway. As she clicked send, she whispered, "Maybe peace is just surrender with better lighting." The cursor blinked, and somewhere deep inside, the old Elin, the girl who once shouted for the seas, finally went quiet. It began quietly, a whistleblower blog, anonymous at first, dissecting greenwashing partnerships. Her name reappeared in threads, hashtags, and think pieces. Screenshots of internal emails, travel receipts, board minutes. Proof that Elin Aas, once the face of purity, had become a corporate emblem. She woke one morning to see her face trending again, only this time next to words like fraud, sellout, liar. The media turned her redemption arc into a spectacle of moral collapse. Sponsors pulled out. Invitations evaporated. The PR firm paused her contract indefinitely. Her lawyer called it reputation turbulence. She called it karma, finally finding her postcode. The phone stopped ringing. Emails stopped coming. The world that once praised her now moved on, quickly, efficiently, like a glacier swallowing sound. She packed her things and left Zurich. Her apartment lease expired quietly. Even the plants she left behind seemed to wilt faster. Back in Stavanger, her mother met her with cautious kindness. Her father avoided eye contact, the kind of Nordic silence that hurt more than shouting. At dinner, no one mentioned the scandal, only the soft clinking of cutlery, like the tapping of guilt against porcelain. That night, she lay awake listening to the waves crash against the harbor. Each wave sounded like applause turning into accusation. She began recording herself, not for interviews, but confessions. An old recorder on her desk, red light blinking like a heartbeat. "I thought I could change them," she whispered one night. "But they changed me first. Or maybe I was never that pure." The tapes filled slowly, hours of rambling, self-cross-examination, memory excavations. She listened back to her own voice, calm, articulate, hollow. the tone of someone who could describe guilt but not feel it fully yet. She wondered, was morality just another kind of performance? Had she always been addicted not to righteousness, but to audience? Months later, the national newspaper ran an exposé, "The Green Betrayal: How an Activist Became the Face of Compromise." It featured her photo, candid, tired, unflattering, taken outside a grocery store. The caption read, "Once Norway's loudest environmental voice, now silent." She became a cautionary tale in classrooms, a headline used in seminars about ethics. Her quotes, stripped of nuance, were repeated as irony. Each article was a mirror, showing her face in fragments, distorted, unforgiving. She wanted to disappear, but even anonymity refused her. The internet never forgot, it just archived. Winter came hard that year. The sea froze near the docks. Elin stopped leaving the house. Days blurred into each other, coffee, regret, static. She deleted her social media accounts, but phantom notifications still haunted her mind. Sometimes she dreamed of microphones, flashing cameras, applause, only to wake up choking on silence. One night, unable to sleep, she walked to the water. The wind cut her cheeks raw. The offshore platforms blinked faintly in the distance, red lights pulsing like mechanical hearts. "You built them," she whispered to the horizon, "and I built the lie that made them bearable." Her breath fogged in the air, vanishing faster than the words could fade. A knock at her door one afternoon. A young journalist, nervous, idealistic, holding a small recorder. He said he wanted to understand, not judge. At first, she refused. Then, perhaps out of loneliness, she agreed. They sat in the kitchen. He asked simple questions, not about the scandal, but the why. "Did you believe you were doing good?" he asked. She hesitated. "I believed I could negotiate with corruption," she said. "But corruption doesn't negotiate, it seduces." He nodded quietly. When he left, he didn't ask for a selfie or a quote. He just said, "Thank you for not pretending." It was the first human kindness she'd received in months. That night, she slept without nightmares. Weeks later, she passed by her reflection in a shop window. Unkempt hair, unpainted face, old coat. And for the first time, she didn't flinch. She realized that the woman staring back wasn't her old self or her false self, just her, stripped of audience, flawed, tired, still breathing. The collapse hadn't destroyed her completely. It had emptied her enough to see what was left, and what was left was fragile, but real. She received notice that she was banned from speaking at environmental forums for ethical inconsistency. Her university revoked an honorary degree. Her bank closed the consulting account for inactivity. Each loss was a lesson in detachment. At first, she felt humiliation, then indifference. Finally, relief. She sold the last of her tailored suits, started taking long walks along the coast, alone. The locals still recognized her, but most pretended not to. Isolation became her quiet trial. No court, no judge, just the echo of what she once stood for. One afternoon, as the northern light fractured through gray clouds, she walked to the sea again, the same spot where she once promised to heal the world. The wind carried the smell of oil faintly, an invisible reminder. She sat on a rock and whispered into the air. "I tried to save the planet, but I couldn't even save my own integrity." Her voice trembled, then steadied. "But maybe this silence, is where honesty begins." A gull circled overhead, its cry sharp against the wind. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash through her. Cold, cleansing, real. By spring, the snow melted into streams that carved through the frozen earth. Quiet, patient, inevitable. So too did her numbness. She began walking every morning along the fjord, notebook in hand, documenting not the planet's wounds, but her own. The pages filled with fragments, memories of speeches, smells of conference halls, faces of volunteers long gone. She wasn't trying to justify anymore. She was trying to understand how ideals turn into armor, and then into mirrors that blind. She wrote, "The lie wasn't that I took their money. The lie was believing I could stay clean while touching it." One evening, she found an old USB stick labeled Nordlight 2012. She plugged it into her laptop. A video appeared, her 25-year-old self standing on a rainy stage, soaked, shouting through a megaphone, "We are the conscience of the North. We are the tide that will wash greed away." The crowd behind her roared. For a moment, the sound pierced the silence of her kitchen like a ghost calling from a purer time. She paused the video, then opened a blank document and began typing a letter. To the girl who believed shouting could save the world. "I'm sorry. You were right about what mattered, wrong about how power works. You thought you could speak truth inside a machine built to recycle it into profit. You thought conviction could survive comfort. But maybe we both had to fall. You to see how fragile purity is, and I to remember why it matters." When she finished, she didn't sign it. She printed it and pinned it to the wall, beside a map of Norway's coastline. Weeks later, one of her former volunteers, Ingrid, now a climate researcher, visited unexpectedly. She hesitated at the doorway, holding a jar of jam and a silence full of judgment. "I almost didn't come," Ingrid said. "I know," Elin replied. They sat by the window, sipping tea, watching rain blur the view of the docks. "You taught us to fight," Ingrid said finally. "And then you taught us what happens when we stop." Elin nodded. "No defense, no denial." "Do you still believe in change?" Ingrid asked. Elin smiled faintly. "Yes, but now I know it doesn't start on a stage. It starts here." She touched her chest. "When the applause is gone." Ingrid left the jam on the table, and when she walked away, Elin felt something inside loosen. Not forgiveness, not yet, but permission to heal. She began recording again, but this time not to analyze, to confess. She described everything. The first deal, the dinners, the speeches she didn't write, the night she vomited after Davos, the mirror she broke in Dubai. Her voice was steady, low. Sometimes she cried, sometimes laughed. But beneath every word was a strange peace, like a wound that finally stopped denying it was open. She ended one tape with, "If anyone ever listens to this, don't judge me by my fall. Judge me by how long it took to admit I fell." Months later, she accepted a small invitation, a local university seminar on environmental ethics. The organizers warned her, "Some will protest." She nodded. "That's fair." When she walked into the lecture hall, the murmurs were sharp. Phones rose. A few students whispered, "That's her." She stood at the podium. No script, no spotlight. "I'm not here to defend myself," she began. "I'm here to remind you that righteousness without humility becomes performance, that activism without accountability becomes marketing, that I became both." A silence followed, tense, electric. One student asked, "Do you regret it all?" Elin took a deep breath. "Not the dream," she said softly. "Only the arrogance of thinking I could control it." No applause, just quiet listening, and for the first time in years that felt holy. After the seminar, she walked to the harbor, carrying the last Nordlight banner, faded, torn. She tied it to a rusted railing overlooking the sea. The wind tugged it gently, the fabric whispering like a breath long held in. She whispered back, "This isn't the end. It's the consequence." Then she let the banner go. It drifted across the water, caught in the current and slowly sank beneath the surface. She watched until it vanished, her reflection rippling in the tide, two faces merging into one, the idealist and the betrayer, finally indistinguishable. That night she returned home and opened her window. The air smelled of rain and diesel, truth and contradiction, just like her life had always been. She whispered a line she once heard her mother say, "Forgiveness isn't freedom, it's endurance." Then she blew out the candle on her desk. Darkness filled the room, but it was gentle, not punishing. She didn't need light to see anymore. Months passed, then seasons. Elin no longer checked the news. The scandals, once headline storms, had drifted into archives, replaced by fresher catastrophes. For the first time in years, she felt the world moving without her. And that, strangely, was a comfort. She took a small job at a local environmental office, writing reports about coastal erosion. No cameras, no slogans, just tide charts and field notes. She biked to work, ate with colleagues who didn't know her past or didn't care. When they introduced her as Elin, part-time consultant, she smiled quietly. There was relief in anonymity. Fame had been a fever. Obscurity was a cure. Her new project was simple. Monitor a stretch of shoreline eroding from rising tides. Every morning she carried her equipment to the cliffs and measured what the sea had taken overnight. Sometimes a few centimeters, sometimes a meter. Always slow, always certain. The repetition became a meditation. Each measurement a quiet ritual of truth. Numbers that couldn't lie. One afternoon she found an old fishing village half submerged, the wooden posts blackened by salt and time. A child's shoe floated by. She photographed it, not for publication, but remembrance. She whispered, "The sea remembers everything we try to bury." That summer, her father grew ill. Elin visited him in the hospital, a man once hardened by machines, now softened by age. He smiled faintly when he saw her. "You used to curse my work," he said. "Now you measure what it left behind." She laughed softly. "Maybe that's justice. Or just gravity." He took her hand. "You were always fighting something bigger than yourself." I was proud, even when I didn't say it. She didn't reply. She just sat there, holding his hand until sleep took him. When he passed a month later, she scattered his ashes at sea. The same water that once paid their bills, now reclaiming him gently. After the funeral, she decided to rebuild Nordlight, not as a movement, but as a community garden on the edge of Stavanger, a place for children to plant trees, for volunteers to learn composting, for no cameras to come. They called it Nordlight Earth. There were no slogans, no banners, only a wooden sign painted by hand. One day, a teenager approached her and asked, "Are you the Elin Aas?" She paused, smiled. "I was. Now I'm just Elin." The girl nodded, curious. "Is it true you worked for the oil companies?" Elin looked toward the horizon, where offshore rigs blinked faintly like distant confessions. "Yes," she said, "and it's also true that I'm still learning how not to." The girl thought for a moment, then asked, "Can you teach us how to fight without becoming like them?" Elin smiled, eyes soft. "Only if you promise to tell me when I forget how." One evening, she listened to her old confession tapes again. The voice on them sounded like someone else, brittle, careful, still clinging to explanation. She decided to record one final entry. "This is not redemption," she said into the microphone. "It's something quieter. Maybe forgiveness is just accepting that we will always carry both the wound and the lesson. If anyone hears this, don't build idols. Don't build villains either. Just listen to the spaces between words. That's where truth usually hides." She stopped the recorder. Didn't delete it. Didn't archive it either. Just left it on the shelf, blinking red, like a small heart still beating. On the anniversary of her first Nordlight protest, she walked again to the fjord. The tide was high, the sky low and pale. Children from the garden were playing nearby, their laughter rising above the wind. She sat on the rocks and breathed deeply, the air cold, clean, honest. For years she'd chased purity and lost herself. Now she understood something simpler, that living truthfully didn't mean being perfect. It meant showing up, even after you failed. She whispered into the wind, "We don't heal the world by being spotless. We heal it by staying human." The words drifted over the water, soft as prayer. Weeks later, she received a letter, handwritten, unsigned. Inside, just one sentence. "I started Nordlight chapters again. Small ones. Your fall doesn't cancel your flame." Elin held the note for a long time, eyes wet, lips trembling into a smile that wasn't pride, just peace. She walked outside, into the field where new saplings swayed in the wind. She touched one, its stem fragile but upright, reaching for light. "Grow slow," she whispered. "Grow honest." Then she stood back and watched the sky shift, gray to gold, gold to blue, as if the world, despite everything, was forgiving itself a little too. If a stranger ever asked what became of Elin Margrete Aas, the answer would depend on the tone. Some would say she fell. Others would say she woke up. In truth, she simply continued, one flawed human among many, tending a small piece of earth, learning how to breathe again without applause. And every dawn, as the light touched the water, she would whisper the same quiet promise, not to the world, but to herself. Never again confuse visibility with virtue. The tide would rise, the gulls would cry, and in that endless rhythm, fall, collapse, confession, return, she found something close to grace.